Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Garb August, one of the seediest, most disreputable events to ever inflict itself on BookTube. It was created by Ollie at Criminali last year. It was a mega hit, and as you can tell, it's about trash. Ollie assembled a group of co-hosts. He's doubled the size of that group this year. All of us wallowing in garbage. We're all wallowing in trash. We're reading worthless books and having a whale of a time. And that is true for me as well. I have had a sweet tooth for garbage for a long, long time. I've had a sweet tooth for trashy books, I would estimate, since before most of my co-hosts were born. And so getting the green light for Garbogus to read more of that stuff, you don't have to ask me twice. So I've been doing that. I've been adding a trash book, reading or rereading, to my night's reading. And last night it was a reread. And it was a reread that covers fairly new ground for Garbogus. We have a whole list of taxonomic reference points for Garbogus. Does it have a naked woman on the cover? Does it have an exclamation point on the cover? Is it the 30th book in a series? Things like that. And we also have, a bingo card and all that sort of stuff. And we've been talking about what constitutes trash and where you find it and how you can tell what it is and all those instant signifiers. One thing you may have noticed, or maybe not, is that almost all the conversation about garbage and Garbogus last year or this year has been fiction. But there's plenty of trash nonfiction. Plenty of it. We're not really stressing that. It's a whole new world. Good Lord, I could devote my whole month to trash nonfiction. I read it every day. I'm commissioned to review it almost every day. It's all around you in the book world. All around you. Religious memoirs of any kind are usually trash. The motivational books, the 5-minute work week, that sort of thing, they're all garbage. And they stray all over the quadratic equation that I gave. Some of them are bad trash. Some of them are good trash, and all the way in between. And last night I was scanning the shelves. I wanted to do a print book, a paper book, last night. I was scanning the shelves, and I almost missed this because I have been, like everyone else, thinking for Garb August of fiction. But I hit on a piece of nonfiction. It's called nonfiction because the author insisted on that. The author insisted that he did research. It is typically categorized. If you were to find a copy of this, you would almost certainly find it in the nonfiction section. You're going to see there's very little about this book that isn't fiction. This is by Frank Spiering, an author named Frank Spiering, and it is called Prince Jack, the True Story of Jack the Ripper. And aside from the fact that there was actually a killer in 1888 called Jack the Ripper, there's precious little in this book that's true. It is the word that always comes to mind. I've read this a few times for reasons that will become obvious. I've read this a few times, and the word that always comes to my mind is hysterical. I don't know of a more hysterical book than this. It's barely in control of itself, barely in control of its vital functions. It gives itself the vapors on just about every 20-page mark. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel murderer, who killed at least 5 women in a discrete span of time in 1888 in a very crowded, very busy, poor neighborhood called Whitechapel, where you would think it would be impossible for someone to kill and eviscerate someone without everyone around them seeing what they were doing. Now, we don't know for sure whether or not that was possible. Whitechapel was a very congested area. If someone, for instance, snatched a half-drunk prostitute off the sidewalk and pulled her behind a tall wooden fence in order to slit her throat, all right, that stops her from yelling. But you're still hunched over her as you cut out her internal organs. You're directly in the view of probably 7, 8, 10, 15 different rat trap little apartments. It's unlikely that even in the dead of night, and even if you're being as quiet as a mouse, no one noticed, no one saw that. But it is very understandable that in a neighborhood like Whitechapel, no one would talk. No one would say anything, especially when talk to police. Needless to say, this became a cause célèbre. All of England was talking about this killer, especially once he identified himself as Saucy Jack, especially once he started taunting the police and sending them things. It became the story of the century. And Whitechapel became absolutely flooded with undercover police operatives, with you know, open and above board, self-professed police operatives just going, talking, needing a solution to this. It was a huge black eye in Victorian London. And it happened out of nowhere. And then it reached a fever pitch. The fever pitch was one night where there were 2 killings in the span of minutes. It seems physically impossible that it could have happened, especially that it could have been done by one person. Then there were more killings, and then, just like it happened, it stopped. Jack the Ripper was never caught. No one was ever actually made to say, I did these crimes. The crimes just stopped on their own. So this is the most famous unsolved crime of all time, and has led to a million theorizing books. Who was Jack the Ripper? What is the solution to this problem? Probably the most popular one for a popular audience that you would know of is the Alan Moore graphic novel From Hell. It's made into a wretched movie, but the graphic novel is absolutely terrific. And in it, Alan Moore puts forward a theory. He floats every other theory in the world. I myself am not. I recognize the achievement of From Hell, but it's never really done much for me in the way that it does for a lot of other armchair theorizers about the Ripper. About a lot of armchair Ripperologists love that book a lot more extensively than I do. But you can't study this without coming to a theory of your own. You have to try and figure out who was the Ripper. The other, for instance, the other claimant to the thing that, if you don't know anything about Jack the Ripper, the other claimant for a book that might have entered your consciousness would be by the popular mystery author Patricia Cornwell, who wrote a nonfiction work. It was as much nonfiction as this is, called Portrait of a Killer, in which she complacently said, I have solved the Ripper crime. It's her solution, to put it mildly, is wrong. But it's not as wrong as the solution that Frank Spiering comes up with in this book. Because in this book, Frank Spiering says that Jack the Ripper was Prince Albert Victor, the son and heir to the son and heir to the Queen of England. So you've got Queen Victoria on the throne. She has an heir, Bertie, the Prince of Wales. And the Prince of Wales has sons. And one of those, his oldest son, is a tall, slim, mustachioed, handsome young man named Prince Albert Victor, he was known familiarly in the press and in London as Prince Eddie. And he cut a swash, definitely, but he was epically stupid. Epically so. His tutors absolutely despaired of him ever being able to learn anything. And one of them, in private, said, you'd have better luck teaching a horse to reason than you would teaching this person to reason. This person who's going to rule England. Prince Eddie is a little bit of an enigmatic figure. He was partially involved in a couple of scandals. We don't know how directly he was, or how much that was just the artifice of other people involved in the scandals wanting to throw the heat of the spotlight off themselves. A bit of an enigmatic figure, just a bit. There's a story. There are stories to Prince Eddie. He is the subject of a couple of really good books. And then he died. He got pneumonia and died. He got pneumonia when that was a death sentence for royalty or common folk alike. And he was he was affianced to Princess May of Teck. She'd been trundled over on the overnight steamer and was set to be his wife. It was an arranged marriage. It was, by all accounts, a fairly loveless marriage, although we don't know about Prince Eddie. There's just enough of a shadow on his own sexuality so that we don't know one way or another. One thing that we do know is that she was, as any good Victorian girlfriend would be, she was devotedly at his bedside when he was raving in the final stages of pneumonia, when he was repeatedly calling out the name of another woman. And everybody in the room is just going, oh no, is that the time? And of course, Prince Albert Victor did not survive. He died. And nobody wanted to waste the return fare of that steamer, so they just handed her to the next in line. She became Queen Mary to another king. She wasn't, just not royalty at its absolute best. But before he died, Prince Eddie had the full slate of royal duties. He cut a figure. He was a lot better looking than his brother. He was a lot better looking than his father. He was a lot better looking than his father was, even when his father was a young man. Prince Albert Victor was not. He very much took after his mother in some aspects of his physiology. Probably that would have stayed true for his whole life, because by the time his father was his age, his father was a little bit of a walrus. He was a little bit tubby. He had a nickname along those lines, but not Prince Albert Victor. He was almost a dashing figure. I think in the photographs that we have of him, I think that his raw nuclear imbecility is easy to see. I think it's fairly easy to see in those photographs. But nevertheless, a handsome young man. And he died. And that has not protected him. Because if you were alive when Victoria was on the throne, if you were alive in 1888, I guarantee you, there's at least a book or a monograph saying that you were the Ripper. And that's what this book does. Frank Spiering says that Prince Albert Victor, who could not dress himself, was Jack the Ripper, who managed to elude police officers who, by the second and third killing, were looking for him on every street corner. He still managed to kill women while those men were out and about, while they were no more than a 5-minute walk from where he was eviscerating his victims. Prince Albert Victor, who grew lightheaded and needed to take a rest on a sofa the first time he ever saw his own blood when he pricked his thumb. This is the person that Frank Spiering says carved out the internal organs of women and cut one woman's throat so badly that it was only her spinal column that kept her head on her shoulders. That was Prince Albert Victor. So when this book originally came out, the hardcover didn't look anything like this, and I gobbled it up right away. I thought, this is just about the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard. But you're not the first person. Spiering wasn't the first person to put this forward. I thought, there are ridiculous Ripper theories, and then there are less ridiculous Ripper theories, but this is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Unless you say that Prince Albert Victor was the front, an accomplice of some kind to other killers. And essentially that is what Spiering gets around to saying in this book. But before he does that, oh my God, do we get hyperventilating prose in this book. I want to read you a couple of examples. This is the cover. My mass market paperback did not have a cover. I had to make a cover of my own. But I want to read you a couple of examples. This is what Prince Eddie thought about his grandmother, about Queen Victoria. To Eddie, Victoria had always been a terrifying figure. He had seen his own father cower before her. Once at Osborne, the Prince of Wales was late for a dinner party, and Eddie had discovered him standing behind a pillar, wiping the sweat from his forehead, trying to build up enough nerve to present himself to the Queen. When at last he had approached her, she gave him a cold nod, whereupon he immediately vanished behind another pillar, remaining there until the party broke up. Eddie himself hated her. She constantly questioned him and made disquieting remarks about his appearance, at the same time wanting to know why he did this or that, or didn't do something, or why he thought as he did about such and such. Her presence, dressed in constant black, filled him with intense depression. Yet he treated her always with a smile and a gracious tone in his voice that seemed to trick her into believing that he admired and cared for her, while it required all his efforts to disguise his true feeling, the intoxicating rage he experienced in her presence. I don't need to go on. I think you get the point. First of all, there was never any. None of this is true, I guess, is what I mean to say. There was never any royal reception where the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne of England, spent the whole night hiding behind a pillar and everybody knew it and just. And we don't know any of this. None of this is recorded. This isn't history. We don't have any idea what Prince Albert Victor thought about Victoria. We barely met her. She was not constantly grilling him on why he did this or why he did that. We have records from 2 meetings. She asked him perfunctory questions. Oh, that's a nice outfit. That's it. That's all. We especially don't know his interiority. We don't know that he's seized with intoxicating hatred for Queen Victoria. It's all, the whole book is like that. It's just full of passages where the author gives vent to hysteria, to just simple hysteria. I want to read you one other bit here. What can we do here? Okay, well, that earlier passage mentioned the Queen Victoria was always in black. That was because she was in mourning for Prince Albert, her prince consort, uh, who would have been Prince Albert Victor's grandfather, who died. He also died of a viral infection that we would easily have cured today. He would have taken a pill, would have gone to bed a little sick, and that's all. He wouldn't have died over the course of days and days and days. But the author doesn't spare Prince Albert. He goes back to give us Prince Albert alive so that he can scream all about Prince Albert as well. Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, had intended that this exhibition, this is the Grand Exposition, the Great Exposition of 1851, I believe is the one we're talking about here, should surpass any in the history of the world, containing samples of what every country could produce in the way of raw materials, machinery, mechanical inventions, manufacture, and the applied arts. Machinery, mechanical inventions, and raw material is manufacture. Okay, Frank? Albert had tried desperately to overcome the fact that he was a German living in a strange land, and Victoria had attempted to buoy his position by naming him Prince Consort. Absolute nonsense. Victoria was as German as he was. The Queen has a right to claim that her husband should be an Englishman, she wrote. But Albert could not overcome the contradictions in his nature, the inner sickness which plagued him to become utterly severe, that gently modest, then scornful, longing for affection, then cold and remote. So he drove himself to attain that perfection, mixed with sentimentality, that plunged his entire family into a realm of shadowy longings, intermingled with vague fears, intense practicality, which finally culminated in the uncontrollable madness of his namesake, Albert Victor. Okay. What on earth? Both Prince Albert, the consort, and Albert Victor, the heir, were extremely unhappy men. Both were driven by ominous lacks in their nature to overcome this sense of depression. Both felt unloved and uncared for, and each experienced that mysterious Teutonic melancholy, that morbid appetite which plunged one into tireless activity for the good and the other into incomprehensible dark rituals. One was a saint, the other a murderer. Both were trapped by a frigid, impregnable mass that they longed unsuccessfully to conquer. I swear, this book still cracks me up. I was laughing out loud when I was reading it last night. There in the dark when the whole world was quiet, unlike now with background noise. I was laughing out loud. It never fails to crack me up. Because, of course, there's no proof for any of that. None of that is substantiated. That is not the writing of history. And it isn't from beginning to end. So I think it definitely qualifies for Garbogus. This is definitely trash. And, again, I did not research the author. I have, as far as I know, I've never researched this author. So I'm just speculating as to what he was like. But I have to believe that, as with all good trash, the upper quadrant of trash, he had to be in on the joke. He had to know what this was. This is ridiculous posh. He had to know that. But you couldn't sustain this hysterical, ultra-purple prose for page after page after page without smiling to yourself. At least I like to think that. I have no idea. I would hope that this author had a sense of humor and was known for it. I would hope that that's true. Needless to say, to wrap up this trash pile for today, needless to say, Prince Albert Victor was not Jack the Ripper. Needless to say, he was not involved in any way. His whereabouts on the exact time, the date, the minute, the hour of every one of the confirmed Ripper killings are known and documented by rooms of people. He wasn't in the country for half these murders. He was in an estate in Scotland, surrounded by 30 people who could attest for his every movement. I have read accounts. I don't think Spiering ever gets around to it. He hints at it a couple of times, but I've read other accounts that say that all those people were in on it. They were all on the take, that they were all bought by whoever was involved, usually the imperial physician, William Gull. That's nonsense. Okay, that's nonsense. The more people you say are involved in your conspiracy, the less likely your conspiracy is to be true. And you would have needed a lot of people to get Prince Eddie to be Jack the Ripper. The idea is absurd. So, in case you were wondering, while we're talking about this book, in case you were wondering, well, is there any grain of truth to it? No, there is not. Not only could Prince Eddie not have done it because he had to figure out how to go downstairs every time he did it. What's this again? It's a foot. I put this foot. What? He was notoriously stupid, a notorious imbecile. That was not some long-standing mask. Not only that, but also he physically couldn't have done it. He wasn't anywhere near the scene of the crime. He has the most lock-solid of all lock-solid alibis. So, needless to say, there's not a word of truth to this, but it would be different if, although there's no word of truth, for instance, it's not a word of truth to Patricia Cornwell's book. Her candidate, likewise, has lock-solid alibis and is even more absurd, if that's possible, than Prince Albert Victor. This would be a very different book. Even if the candidate were absurd, it would be a very different book if it weren't written like that. It's written as high-octane trash in addition to being silly. so it fit just perfectly for Garb August. I don't know if I'll do any other nonfiction for Garb August. There's plenty of it, but there's so much fiction calling to me, including the heart of my nonfiction love. The number one discovery that I made in trash in Garb August. A lot of you have been emailing me wondering, when are we going to hear about that particular permutation of trash? Could be tomorrow. Could be next time. I don't know. It is calling to me. I'm even writing it for August. But not today. Today we have Prince Albert Victor as Jack the Ripper. Might as well say he stormed the beaches at Normandy. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. That's my Garb August trash pile for today, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.